The United States' 50% tariff measure on Indian goods officially took effect on 27th of August on a huge chunk of Indian exports. This includes a second 25% duty, which has now been added to the earlier 25% hike notified this month. Now you might be wondering, why India, why now, and who's going to feel the most heat? Let's break it down. Firstly, why is this happening? This is part of US President Donald Trump's ongoing tariff campaign. The White House says it's targeting countries with close economic ties with Russia, with India being a key buyer of Russian crude. Remember, the hike has drawn strong condemnation from New Delhi, while Moscow has backed India's right to choose its own trading partners. So, here's what the numbers are looking like. India exports nearly $86.5 billion worth of goods to the US every year. Of that, about $60.2 billion, which is nearly two-thirds, will now face this 50% tariff. Now, government estimates are a bit lower, which is close to $48 billion, but still massive and substantial. That is not just a statistic. It's about millions of Indian workers and businesses, especially small and medium enterprises who rely on US as their biggest customer. Now let's take a look at which sector will be hit the hardest and where exactly is this going to hurt. Let's go sector by sector. Textiles and apparels. The US is India's #1 buyer here. Exports top about $10.8 billion a year. The tariff means that Indian garments will now face duties of almost 64%. That wipes out price advantages over rivals like Bangladesh and Vietnam. Take Tirupur in Tamil Nadu, for example, which is a hub for cotton knit weavers. It alone accounts for 30% of India's garment exports and supports nearly 600,000 workers. Now that entire cluster is at risk. Gems and jewellery. The US buys nearly $10 billion worth of Indian gems and jewellery every year. With duties at 52%, cities like Surat, which handle 80% of the world's diamond cutting, are already reporting order cancellations and layoffs. Seafood, especially shrimp. Half of India's shrimp exports, which is about $2.4 billion, goes to the US. The tariff here is brutal, that is 60%. That could price India out of the market completely, and competitors like Ecuador, which only pays about 15% duty due to a trade pact, will suddenly look much cheaper. Now, carpets, leathers, footwear, furniture. Carpet exports stood at about $1.2 billion in financial year 25, now faces a 52.9% effective duty. Rising inflation in the US has already dampened demand, and the new tariff may well push buyers towards Turkey and Vietnam. Auto components. India exported nearly $6.6 billion worth of auto parts to the US in 2024. Now, about half of that, mainly car and small truck components worth $3.4 billion, will face a 25% tariff, while the rest gets hit with a full 50% rate. Key segments like gearboxes and transmissions, where India holds a 40% US market share, risk losing grounds to rivals in Mexico and Europe. Chemicals and organic compounds. Exports worth $2.7 billion, much of it driven by small and mid-sized firms. Now, they'll be competing with suppliers from Japan, South Korea, who enjoy lower US tariff rates. Agriculture and processed foods. Basmati rice, tea, spices, processed foods together cost worth $6 billion in exports. All of that now under 50% duty. That's bad news for India's farmers and food processors, and a big opening for rivals like Thailand and Pakistan. So, are there any exemptions? A few big categories are safe, well, at least for now, and that is pharmaceuticals. India's biggest exports to the US, over $10.5 billion, is currently exempt. But Trump has already hinted that American drug companies will be pushing to move production back home. Electronics, which is iPhone assembled in India, still make it into US duty-free. Electronics are actually India's second largest exports to the US at nearly $15 billion. Petroleum products worth $4.1 billion also exempted right now. Some niche categories too, including books, certain metals and server hardware, are exempted. All told, about $27.6 billion worth of exports are escaping the higher tariff brackets. But why are MSMEs at most risk? Here's the thing. India's micro, small and medium enterprises make up over 70% of export capacity, and many of the hit sectors including textile, seafood, gems and chemicals. These firms work on razor-thin margins. They are concentrated in clusters like in Tirupur, in Surat, in Panipat or Morbi, and they can't just absorb a 50% duty. Orders are already being cancelled, shipments are halted, factories are slowing down. Remember, India has already lost the Generalized System of Preference or GSP trade benefits way back in 2019. That safety net is now gone for many of these exporters. This tariff hike could be a final blow. Now, can India's economy handle it? On the big picture level, economists are not panicking just as yet. Exports of goods are only about 20% of India's GDP. Domestic demand in sectors like telecom, cement, aviation and services is still very strong. So agencies like Fitch and Morgan Stanley are sticking with their 6.5% growth forecast for next year. But here's a catch. Loss of US demand could slow job creation. Industrial clusters could see major disruption. SBI research warns that this tariff shock alone could shave off about 10 to 50 basis points from India's GDP. Now, this isn't just about trade, it's also about geopolitics. The US says India's oil imports are helping fund Russia's war in Ukraine. Before the war, India barely bought any Russian oil, but today, Russian supplies over 42% of India's crude. And for Washington, that is unacceptable. But for New Delhi, it's about affordable energy and strategic autonomy. Prime Minister Modi, speaking just this week, called the global trade climate of economic selfishness. He said that India will keep building resilience no matter how much pressure it faces. So, is there a way out? Indian officials thought early this year that they could cap tariffs at 15% through a deal, but negotiation collapsed. A planned US visit for bilateral trade talks that was scheduled for 25th of August has also been postponed. But for now, India has ruled out any retaliation. Instead, the government is now drafting a 25,000 crore export promotion mission that includes easier trade finance, e-commerce hubs, warehousing, better global branding for made in India products. So where does this leave things right now? The US remains India's biggest export market, but with tariffs now doubling in so many categories, Indian exporters are facing a crossroad: adapt, diversify, or risk collapse. Now, for India's exporters, especially its small businesses, this is shaping up to be the toughest trade test in years.